My name is Elsa, and this is the story of how my life was turned upside down, not just once, but twice. I think it's best to start from the very beginning. I was born in a small suburban town to two loving parents, Oscar and Joanna David. My dad was a journalist and my mom worked as a nurse. We didn't have a lot of money, but we were happy. Life was pretty normal for us until I turned 15. That's when everything changed. It was a rainy Friday evening. My parents had gone to a dinner party, and I was at home with my grandma, watching a silly cartoon on TV. Suddenly, the phone rang. I'll never forget the cold chill that ran down my spine when I heard my grandma crying softly in the kitchen. The next few days passed by in a blur. Everything felt like a bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. They told us that my mom had died instantly in a car crash. My dad survived, but just barely. When I finally saw him in the hospital, he was only a shadow of the strong man I once knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctors said he would never walk again. When I went to see him, he reached out for my hand and whispered, "Elsa, I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault. A drunk driver had crashed into their car. But as I got older, I started to realize why he felt sorry. He was sorry for what our lives had become, for the struggles we were going to face, for the mother I'd lost, and for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Oscar David, was much stronger than he gave himself credit for. After he got out of the hospital and learned to live in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He had always been a talented writer, and now he focused all his energy on his job as an editor at the city's major newspaper. As I enter my teenage years, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, make friends, and live as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We watched old movies together, argued about books, and he even helped me with my homework. When it was time for college, Dad insisted that I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." I was hesitant to leave him, but I knew he was right, so I went off to college. I attended the State University of New York and studied accounting. That's where I met Emma, who quickly became my best friend. Through Emma, I met her second cousin, Magnus. Magnus was kind and funny, and he didn't flinch when I told him about my dad. In fact, when he met Dad for the first time, they got along immediately, bonding over their shared love of classic rock music. Later, Magnus told me, "Your dad is really cool, and you're amazing for taking care of him all these years." I tried to brush off the compliment, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. A life filled with love, laughter, and even the possibility of having a family of my own someday. After graduation, things started falling into place like a puzzle. I got a job at a local tax service, and Magnus started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 4 years before he proposed to me on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was thrilled, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Magnus," I said, "but I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Magnus smiled wide and said, "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the three of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. As I stood there holding Magnus' hand, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Sophia, and my sister-in-law, Karen. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. During our first meeting, Sophia asked with a wrinkled nose, as if she smelled something bad, "So, your father is handicapped?" "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to stay calm. "But he works as an editor," she said dismissively, not really interested in what I had to say. Then she turned to Magnus and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment when Sophia made that hurtful comment. But before I could respond, Magnus immediately jumped in to defend me. "Mom, Elsa is from a good family, and her dad's disability doesn't change that." I love her, and that's all that matters, he said firmly. Sophia didn't say anything more, but I could still see the disapproval in her eyes. Karen, following her mother's lead, was just as cold and distant towards me. After the wedding, Magnus stayed true to his word and moved in with Dad and me. Our life soon settled into a comfortable routine. I would go to work at the tax office, while Magnus was often on the road for days at a time with his trucking job. When he was home, we all had dinner together, and those moments felt like a glimpse of the happy family life I had always wanted. But whenever Sophia and Karen visited, the atmosphere in our home changed completely. It was as if they thought they owned the place. They barely acknowledged Dad's presence, and their coldness made every visit feel like walking on eggshells. One day, I overheard Sophia whispering to Karen when they thought I wasn't listening. "It's a shame. Magnus could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. Can you imagine if they have children? What if the bad genes get passed on?" Her words cut through me like a knife. I was furious, but I kept quiet for Magnus' sake. I tried to maintain the peace, but it was getting harder and harder to keep my feelings bottled up. One evening, after an especially tense visit from Sophia and Karen, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. Magnus found me in our bedroom, sobbing uncontrollably. Hey, he said gently, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "It's your mom and sister," I cried, the words spilling out between sobs. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you, because of Dad." Magnus' face hardened with resolve. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words were a comfort, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Sophia and Karen. As the months went by, Magnus' trucking business started to grow. He was on the road even more, traveling across the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I focused on my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Magnus called me. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Elsa, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in his wheelchair, and he could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden, something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I liked the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted, "and it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was a big step and a bit scary, but with Magnus' income, mine, and the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Sunday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty with emotion. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in and making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Life was peaceful, almost perfect. Then we decided to host a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, even Sophia and Karen. The party was in full swing when they showed up, fashionably late as usual. They walked in, looking around with barely hidden envy. As we toured the house, I could see Sophia's mind working, calculating something. When we reached the master bedroom, Sophia turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Elsa," she said quietly, "this would be perfect for Magnus and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" I managed to say, barely keeping my voice steady. "Oh, don't look so shocked," Sophia continued, her tone condescending. "Your father isn't well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could even respond, Sophia marched out to the patio where Dad was chatting with some guests. To my horror, She grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him toward the driveway. "Sophia!" I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing? If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors." I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Magnus heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he yelled. "What the hell are you doing? Let go of Oscar's chair right now." Sophia looked shocked by Magnus' tone. "But honey, I don't want to hear it." Magnus cut her off. "You and Karen need to leave now." After they left, Magnus apologized over and over to Dad and me. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never thought they would do something like this." "I had no idea she would do that," Magnus said, his voice heavy with regret and sorrow. "I'm just so sorry." Dad reached out and gently patted Magnus' hand. "It's not your fault, son," he said with a comforting tone. "Some people just can't understand." After that shocking incident with Sophia and Karen, life slowly settled into a new routine. They kept their distance, which was perfectly fine with me. I had no desire to see them again, and it seemed they felt the same way. Magnus focused on his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help pay for our new home, and I split my time between my job at the tax office, taking care of our home, and looking after Dad. The next 4 years passed by quickly, almost too quickly. Our life became comfortable and predictable. Magnus was on the road most of the time, driving his big rig across the country, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content, spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. We had created a peaceful life together, one that felt safe and secure. But then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work, going through my usual routine, when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, a man who introduced himself as Officer Andrew from the Highway Patrol. My heart immediately sank. "Yes," I barely managed to say, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Magnus Walker, has been in a serious accident," the officer said. The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and "didn't make it" floated around me, but I couldn't fully grasp their meaning. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up the phone that the reality began to sink in. Magnus was gone. The next week was a haze of grief and disbelief. I went through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely understanding what was happening around me. It all felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. The day before the funeral, I knew I had to do something that filled me with dread. I had to call Sophia. Despite everything, I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from a newspaper obituary. With shaking hands, I dialed her number. After a few rings, Sophia's sharp voice answered. "Hello." "Sophia, it's Elsa," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Magnus. He's gone. There was an accident." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might actually show some compassion. But then, to my shock, Sophia's voice came back, dripping with anger. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You made him work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son." I was stunned, completely taken aback by her cruelty. "Sophia, that's not." "Save it," she snapped, cutting me off. "I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy, but don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed. Now lie in it." With that, the line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? My grief was already overwhelming, but Sophia's words added a new layer of pain that I didn't know how to handle. The day of Magnus' funeral was gray and rainy, perfectly matching my mood. The church was full. Magnus was well-liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had come to pay their respects. But as I stood there, receiving condolences from friends and neighbors, I noticed that Sophia and Karen were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't even bothered to show up for their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand, his touch grounding me in the midst of my sorrow. "It's their loss, sweetie," he said softly. We're family, and we'll get through this together. After the service, we drove back home in silence. As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange, because I was sure I had turned everything off before we left. "Did you leave any lights on, Dad?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I noticed movement inside the house. My heart started pounding. Were we being robbed? On the day of Magnus' funeral? I quickly helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing with fear and anger. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Sophia and Karen in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Sophia turned to me, her face a mask of fake sympathy. "Oh, Elsa dear, we're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Magnus is gone." I was speechless, completely caught off guard by their audacity. Karen added, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Don't worry. You can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel the anger building inside me, rising like a tidal wave. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Sophia had the nerve to look offended. "This house belongs to us now. All of Magnus' property does. We're his family, after all." "Like hell you are," I exploded. "Where were you today? At his funeral?" "Oh, that's right. You couldn't be bothered to show up." Sophia waved her hand dismissively. "We were busy making arrangements. Now be a good girl and start packing. We'll need you out by tomorrow." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Magnus, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home. My home. The home Magnus and I had built together. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and determination. Sophia and Karen exchanged worried looks, clearly not expecting me to fight back. "Now, Elsa?" Sophia began, but I cut her off, my voice firm and unwavering.
"No."
"You have exactly 10 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Magnus and I bought it together. You have no right to be here." Maybe it was the steel in my voice or the fire in my eyes, but Sophia and Karen finally realized they had gone too far. They quickly gathered their things and left, but not before Sophia turned to me with a sneer. "This isn't over, Elsa. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." The days after Magnus' funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and endless paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Magnus' affairs, partly to keep busy, and partly out of fear that Sophia and Karen would try to take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered, terrified it was Sophia following through on her threat of legal action. "Mrs. Walker?" A crisp, professional voice asked. "This is Scott Thompson from Thompson and Partners. I'm calling about your late husband's will." I felt a small flicker of hope. "His will? I didn't know he had one." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Walker came to see us about 5 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing." I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind spinning with questions. Why hadn't Magnus told me about this? What did it all mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Thompson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. David, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for us to sit near his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Thompson opened a file on his desk. "Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. Thompson began to read. "I, Magnus Walker, being of sound mind, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Elsa Walker." I gasped, and Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Thompson continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Elsa use these resources to care for herself and her father, Oscar David, whom I have come to love as my own. Tears streamed down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Magnus was taking care of us. There's more, Mr. Thompson said gently. Mr. Walker left a letter for you. He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Elsa, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Oscar. Please know that you two are the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Oscar were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Elsa, you and Oscar, not them. Take care of each other, live your lives to the fullest, and know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Magnus. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm in silent comfort. Mr. Thompson gave us a moment before speaking again. Mrs. Walker, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy. I looked up, sniffling. What does that mean? Mr. Thompson gave me a small smile and said, it means you'll be receiving a large sum of money, enough to pay off your mortgage and more. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Magnus had made sure of it. But as we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Sophia's sleek sedan. Oh no, I muttered, dread creeping in. What now? Sure enough, Sophia and Karen were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Magnus' letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. Elsa, Sophia began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet. We need to talk about Magnus' estate. I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. No, Sophia, we don't. Magnus left everything to me. It's all legal and official. Do you want to know why? Because we were his real family, not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property. For once, Sophia was speechless. Karen tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got into their car and drove away. The weeks after our meeting with the lawyer were busy. I threw myself into settling Magnus' affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and just as Mr. Thompson had said, it was enough to pay off our mortgage with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Magnus' desk, I found a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and saw pages filled with his messy handwriting. It was a journal of sorts, full of his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids. One entry read, "Want to make sure they have the best start in life." My heart clenched as I realized how much Magnus had been planning for a life we would never get to live. But at the same time, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Magnus had loved me and Dad so much that he had thought of everything, even when he knew his family might try to take it all away. Magnus and I had often talked about having children someday, but we decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Magnus' private hopes and dreams in that notebook, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. "Oh, Magnus," I whispered, holding the notebook close to my chest. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the journal, to the future we would never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Magnus. In my dream, he was smiling at me, his eyes full of love and reassurance. He held out his hand to me and said, "It's okay, Elsa. Everything's going to be all right." His words, even in a dream, brought me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something had changed inside me. As I got ready for work, a sudden wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. The morning sickness didn't go away in the days that followed. At first, I thought it was just the stress and grief taking a toll on my body, but a small voice in the back of my mind suggested something else. After a week of this, I found myself standing in the pharmacy, staring at the shelves of pregnancy tests. My hands trembled as I picked one out and hurried home. The 5 minutes I waited for the result felt like the longest of my life. My heart pounded in my chest, and when I finally looked at the test, there were two clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions, joy, fear, grief, and hope all swirling together. "Elsa?" Dad's voice came through the door, filled with concern. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked, stepping closer. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad," I whispered, and then I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me tightly, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured softly. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Elsa, and this baby is a gift. A piece of Magnus that will live on." His words hit me deeply, and the fear that had been gnawing at me began to fade. This baby was a part of Magnus, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, a strong determination welled up inside me. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift, and we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's my girl. Now, let's get you something to eat. You're eating for two now, after all." As we headed to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope growing inside me. The road ahead would be challenging, but with my father by my side and Magnus' child growing within me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the two of us, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Sophia's sleek sedan. What could they possibly want now? I walked to the front of the house, one hand instinctively resting on my swollen belly. Sophia and Karen stood on our porch, looking both uncomfortable and slightly desperate. "Elsa," Sophia began, her voice missing its usual sharpness, "we need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Karen spoke up, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they had put us through, they had the nerve to ask for more. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm but calm. "That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore." Sophia's eyes narrowed as she noticed my pregnant belly, and her face twisted with shock and disgust. "You're pregnant?" she spat, her tone filled with venom. "Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Magnus' body isn't even cold in the ground." I felt a surge of anger rise within me, but I pushed it down, refusing to let her get to me. I didn't bother explaining that it was Magnus' child. I didn't want my baby to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled a small, secretive smile that seemed to unsettle Sophia even more. "My personal life is none of your concern," I said calmly. "Now, I think it's time for you to leave." Sophia looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Karen's arm, and I watched as they drove away. As their car disappeared down the street, a sense of peace washed over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and kept my dignity. Magnus would have been proud.